Nice to meet with you guys for another time. And I hope you all are fine, by the way. You know, we've been having a lot of rain. It's good for some people, kind of challenging for some people. Yeah. But despite whatever it is, let us, continue to give thanks. Yeah. So I hope you all are fine and dry enough. And I hope you all have been reading as well. All right, good. So last week we looked through levels of measurement, and we had a conversation around that, as well as how we could go about analyzing some data sets. And this week I promised that we talk about how to develop instruments, more so quantitative instruments, and how to go about doing data analysis. All right? Anybody recall that conversation? Debbie?
Yes, sir. Afternoon.
How are you?
Not very well.
Not very well. How was the week that was?
Not very well.
Not very well either.
No.
Okay. We're affirming it's going to be better, eh?
I pray so too.
Yeah, we know it's going to be better, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
So how have things been in terms of your reading, your progress with the course?
Been trying to read. I don't think I'm getting through based on the amount of materials that you've been sending or you've had posted. I'm not feeling like I'm getting through that much. And so I'm not feeling very confident at this point. So if I'm to, cover all the different things that we're getting.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I'd say to you is, first of all, take it in steps and don't let it overburden you. Right?
Yes.
Right. So just take it in steps. What I'd also say, so what's your reading routine for the week, for example?
I try to read. So after class, and for each class, I try to read after class. Mm-hmm. I'm not able to stay up as long. I try to read on the weekend as well, but I have other situations going on that is impeding that to some extent. But I try to put in some effort, like even after, if I don't read immediately after class, I'll go to sleep and wake maybe about 3 and try to read before I have to go to work.
Okay, that's a good strategy. I've found that work for me in that early mornings, and you have to kind of know your rhythm, because I found at one point getting home, I was able to do it. And I found early morning was the best thing. So you kind of have to find that rhythm as well.
Yeah.
That's something I'd say to the class. Know your good time, quote unquote, yeah, and try and work on it, yeah. So in everything, I found myself in an online class, right? Class like you doing online class, I found myself in an online class. Mm-hmm. I registered for it, and for some reason, it's just an initial process, and so I registered for it and thought, oh, class would start in January. But it so happened that the class is starting now, so I kind of crammed that into it. But, with everything, what it does is that it actually allows us to see what we can do and to stretch us, yeah? So take it incremental, all right?
Yes, sir.
And I hope whatever is happening, will pass. Everything passes. So just know it too shall pass, eh?
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Latanya, how have things been?
Hi, sir. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm all right, sir.
All right, good, good. How has the reading been?
So I kind of have 2 online classes per day. One for a 3-year-old and then for myself in the evening.
Well, I've heard about it. I can't
Yes,
say I
sir.
know about it. I've only heard about it. Yeah.
Sir, not until you experience it, then you'll really know what it is like.
Yeah, man. I hear the people in my office talk about it though. Yeah, yeah. And you know, even for those who have, you know, more than one and are working from home, yeah, it can be that thing. It can be that thing. Yeah? But still keep going, still keep going. As I know with all the other cohorts, research is one thing that it can take a little time to digest and for you to come into your form and stuff. But the strategy is to do it incrementally, right? So read things incrementally. And I'd also suggest to the group to have discussions, have conversations around some of the things that you're doing. So, you know, make it be a group thing sometimes rather than an individual thing. And some of the times that works because what you may not cover or you may not get in a lecture or discussion, somebody else may understand it and you can have a little powwow and, you know, lighten the moment while you try and understand it. So that's one suggestion as well. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. Good. Good. Good.
Sir.
All right. So who is that?
Giovanni.
Hey, Gio. How are you doing?
Not too bad, sir. Sir, I have a query though, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, so you see the weekly reading, sir, like the Anthony guy that you're always telling us about, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So I look back at last week, and leading from last week into this week, sir. I can't make a link with the reading. I can't make the link. I can't make it. So last week we did levels of measurement, and what I was reading was one about mixed methods, sampling designs, and so, sorry, I didn't really see the link between last week lecture and this coming into this week.
Okay, so and that was the only thing you saw from the last week's reading?
No, it's week 5 reading. It was 2 articles, but I had only looked at one. The other one I couldn't. I don't know. I can't access it on the website through the link that's on the course outline. But
Okay.
I had access to one about mixed method sampling designs in social sciences research. But
Okay.
when I read, I can't make the links.
Okay. So for example, you noted that I placed and I sent back today with Olivine the article on Anthony Awebuze, linking research questions to mixed methods data analysis.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. Because that one in particular, and I've been emphasizing that person should read that one. So if you think through about the conversation we had last week, for example, and what we're going to go into this week, even before last week, we're talking about design, for example, research design, and we're talking about research questions, for example. And if you noted, we also have spoken about the process, right? The research process. Now, if you note in this article, Anthony Awebuze actually points out many of these things, including also, so some of it is not going to be clear, but including, for example, inherent in all of the conversation is we spoke about levels of measurement last week, right? And we also spoke about the analysis and the link with research questions. And so these are some of the things that are actually coming out from this article in particular, right?
Yes, sir.
So if you also remembered, we spoke about the fact that in order to go about doing a research, then there are participants who are going to be involved in the research. And so the question is, how then, for example, do we select those participants? So if you remember last week, for example, I introduced it to G Power.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason for introducing it to G Power was that, one, we wanted to look at the statistical techniques, but more so to look at how many participants are going to be involved in this research that you're doing. Right?
Is it checking the sample size? With that?
Right. So, for example, that article that you're making reference to in terms of sampling, how do you go about sampling or choosing the sample to be involved in the research, right, is important because it gives you a sense of what are the different sampling techniques that exist for you to use, right?
Okay.
But I'm glad you've raised this point, right? Because yes, there are the connecting pieces there. So I'd say to others, if you're not making the link, please say it.
And what I was
good point, Gio.
okay, sir. Because I was after the impression, sir, when I saw the mixed methods, I thought we were doing them like in stages. So like 1 week could cover the quantitative aspect of it. Then we move on to the qualitative one. Because I was of that impression.
But listen, it's kind of a little teasing in. So if you also look back on Anthony Auerbuse's article, and I would strongly recommend that the entire class does, because you remember we spoke about design, and so that article really, and I found no other article that really brings the whole thing to you in terms of the design, but linking the design with the research questions and ultimately the types of analyses that you'll be required to do.
Okay.
Right? So that article for me kind of just brings everything together, but also shows you how this mixed methods thing will come into play.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So again, when we come to the conversation of mixed methods, it won't be a hard conversation because kind of from further up, you'd have started to kind of gotten introduced to it.
Okay, sir.
Right. So again, I'd encourage you and others to go back and look at that article by Anthony Auerbuse that speaks about the linking of research questions to the types of analysis and stuff. And again, it clearly sets out for us the types of design. So if you look through it, it speaks about the relational design, it speaks about the descriptive design, it speaks about the comparative design. And it gives us the research questions or types of research questions that we can think about. All right? Okay, good. All right. So, Olivine,
Yes,
just one
I'm
quick
here.
thing. Yeah, one quick thing. So the notes I had sent, you'd managed to send to them, right?
Yes.
Great, great. All right. So I'm just really asking because some of what I'm gonna touch on is used. That material is useful. So I looked back and found, and I last week I spoke about the practicum, and I looked back and found the instrument that one of our colleagues designed for this year's practicum. And so that instrument that I sent is an instrument that was designed for this year's practicum. And in it, there are things that we spoke about last week. So we can identify levels of measurement, but we spoke about, you know, we spoke about scale, for example, and I spoke about what's the difference with a scale and a subscale, and different, you know, types of scale. And in the material that I've sent, I've also spoken about it. One of the things I want us to do this week is to, for example, critique this instrument that we have in our possession, and by critiquing, look at, you know, what is good about it, and also what are some of the things that can be improved as we go about, you know, doing what we need to do. Because the truth is that come the time for your practicum, it's a similar experience that you could be called upon to, or a similar thing you could be called upon to do, where you're asked to design an instrument. And so it becomes useful if you don't have that skill now to try and get it, right? Or even to make the connection between what you're doing now and how it is going to be relevant for your practicum, right? Okay. But before we transition into that, are there any, I don't want to use the word concerns because they're not, but anything from last week's conversation that you want to put to the table before we move on? Trisha Gay? Trisha Gay?
Hi, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm fine.
All right. So last week we spoke about levels of measurement. You want to lead us back into that conversation, because this week we're gonna have to identify some levels of measurement, right? So do you want to lead us into that conversation? What was the conversation about levels of measurement last week?
So what you had discussed was there are 4 types of measurements, and the abbreviation is NOIR for nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. The lowest of them is the nominal, and for that measurement, it is a discrete category. You had said that, and it's the classification of mutually exclusive categories. So an example of nominal measurement would be like gender. So it's either male or female. And there is no order, it's limited in descriptive ability. And then you have the ordinal level of measurement. And for that one, it's like Likert scale. An example for that one is like the Likert scale. So you can have agree, strongly agree, or disagree. And there is no exact measurement for the ordinal data.
Go again with that. There's no exact measurement. What exactly does that mean?
So the measurement in between may not be equal.
Okay.
For that one. And then you have the interval. Now for the interval, it's ordered category, and there are equal distance when you're using the interval measurement. So equal distances between them. So for an example of the interval would be exam mark. and there is an exact difference between measurements when using the interval. And then you have the ratio. So for the ratio, it's the ranking, the measurement between is equal. So for example, might be length. So it can be 3.54. So you can measure in between each measurement then. And yeah, so that was our main focus for last week class.
Okay, all right. Good. All right, so did anybody get the chance to look at the, not everything now, but the set of stuff that was sent to you? At least browsing.
Yeah, I browse it and download on the P.
Huh?
Yeah, I browse it and download the PSPP. Is that it? PSPP. I downloaded that to try
Oh,
to.
you downloaded that. Okay. All right. So let me just try and share screen here. And so in a short while, are you seeing my screen here?
Yes, onboarding survey.
Right, right. So this is the instrument I was referring to earlier that the student developed. And so what I'm going to try and do is to create some groups and for persons in the groups to just look through the instrument and to have a conversation within those groups to do some critique of the instrument. So for example, looking through, so last week I spoke about an instrument being a scale and then there's subscales, right? So I wanted to look through, but also look through the items, for example. So here you see it's on a Likert scale, for example, but look through the items that are being asked and see whether or not you would ask these items. The construct that is being measured is onboarding, right? So that's the first thing. But look, for example, at the introduction. So this is intended to be the introduction. Look, for example, and see if that's an appropriate introduction. Then look through the instrument itself to see if there are anything that could be improved. Now, here's a section B. So you also need to look through that as well. There's also a section C. There's also a section D, and there is a section E, which covers demographics. At the bottom here, I've also indicated what was the intention in terms of how the different subscales would be identified. So here are the different subscales that were said to be coming out of the instrument, right? So what I wanted to do is to spend some time critique and to see if, for example, you're developing an instrument, you had the task to develop this instrument, for example, or one somewhat similar, how would you do it or even improve this one? So I also wanted to think about what are the different levels of measurement. So here you see, for example, in this section, there is a demographics. Here, there is some data. Here as well, there's some. And in section A, there's some data as well. So to look through and to say what's the levels of measurement that you see. Let me just go back to my screen here. Okay. So just give me 1 minute. I'm trying to. Okay. All right, so just give me 1 minute. I'm gonna try and create the breakout rooms. So I know you all are in groups, but for the purpose of this, I'm just gonna randomly assign persons. So I'm gonna create 5 rooms.
Sir, what did you say where to look for again?
So what you're gonna do is critique the instrument, right? And in critiquing the instrument, I want you to start from the introduction. So your instrument should have an introduction, and in that introduction, it should tell the reader, for example, what is your intent, but it should, so first of all, the questionnaire should have a name, and we're seeing this one, it does have a name, right? But a name that tells the reader, you know, gives the reader an insight as to what is being done. But in your introduction should also give the reader a sense of what is being done. You should also, you know, promise the reader things like confidentiality and the stuff, right? In the body of the instrument itself, you're gonna look at the items. So let me give you an example. So for example, you will see in the list of things, there are items which you could question whether or not somebody could really understand, or somebody's really understanding, right? As well as I also question whether or not we should have two items or two statements, or there should be separate statements, because you could confuse the reader, right, as well. So things like those, look for the level of measurement. So like in section A, determine what's the level of measurement. In section B, what's the level of measurement, right? And things like those. So you're looking for how the statements are expressed. You're looking for levels of measurement, identifying levels of measurement, and critiquing the instrument overall, right? Okay, so let me just, I'm gonna give you about half an hour to do it, right? I'm gonna do a countdown of 60 seconds. So that will notify you when time is up, right?
60 seconds?
Yeah, man. So you can get half an hour to have the conversation, and the countdown is gonna be 60 seconds. So when 29 minutes comes, you're gonna get, yes?
Okay, I just wanted to be clear, you said 60 seconds.
60 seconds for countdown. So there's a timer. So when your time is up, you're gonna get a signal that says, okay, you're soon coming, you'll soon be required to come back to the main room, and it will count down. So when the 60 seconds would be exhausted, it will bring you right back into the main room.
Sir, will
Okay.
we be able to scroll through the document while in the breakout rooms, or you will take it through for us?
You guys have the document.
Oh, we have this, okay.
Yes, so which is why I asked Olivine earlier if it was sent to you. So you have the document in your possession.
All right, let me look for it.
Is that fine? So you all have been automatically assigned to group. So there are 5 groups, breakout group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So I'm gonna actually open the rooms now, which means that we're leaving the main room and you're going into your individual rooms, right? Are we all fine?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. So are we all back?
Appears so. There are 28 people in the room.
Okay, I probably need to close this breakout room thing so I can see. I'm only seeing pop up for one persons. No, yeah. But I'm seeing the sign at 28 persons. So did anybody fuss and fight and stuff? Because we know when we have small groups, you know, some of those things can happen. But what was the experience like? I see Ramona's thing come up in front of you. Ramona, how you doing?
I'm good, sir.
Give thanks. Give thanks. So what was your group process like just now?
We just quick.
Huh?
We just quick. It was good, sir. Experience was
Yeah,
good. Everyone participated, and you know, we worked together well. We
great.
came to our decisions quickly.
Great. And that's part of the thing with the group, you know, with the cohort, I should say, the cohorts. Olivine can tell you, I've known of people working good enough, and that's the standard you guys need to keep up. All right. All right. So we're gonna have some conversation about the instrument that you just reviewed, and you may have been seeing that as this activity was going on, I was actually broadcasting, you know, some of the things that you need to look at and consider, right? So I'm going to start with breakout room 1 to give me some of the things that you spoke about, you know, from the introduction. What was the conversation like about the introduction? So just one person from breakout room.
How do we know which breakout room we were?
Ah, all right. So let
We
me.
were nutrition.
We were 3? Okay.
We were 2.
2?
Yeah, 'cause-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Debbie's group was 5.
5. So I want to start with 1. All right? So group 1, what was your conversation around the introduction? Was it fine for you? Hey there. I probably should have done a snapshot of the groups so I'd know who was in what. Yeah.
Let's start with
Olivine,
group 5.
which group were you in?
Group 5. Group 5 with Debbie and Tremaine and Titania.
Okay. So Olivine.
No, man. Tremaine and Debbie.
Tremaine. So Tremaine. Okay, Tremaine. Debbie. Tremaine.
Yes, sir.
So help us kick the conversation off. What was the conversation around the introduction?
If you are going, I should.
Whichever one.
Okay. All right. So we started off with looking at the introduction. One of the things that we discussed was that it's a bit wide. We weren't sure if for this purpose you redacted the introduction for confidentiality or something like that, but we acknowledged that it was a bit wide. Some of the things that we discussed, one of the main thing was that the reason for the research was the results will be used for the completion of the MSc Human Development Practicum.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that it was a reason, so it ticked the box in terms of giving a reason, but was it a good reason? Maybe not.
So Tremaine, I didn't redact anything. In fact, the only thing I placed there at the very end was where you see themes and stuff. I put that so you could also understand how to form the subscales, but I didn't redact anything. So I gave you the exact instrument that the student administered.
Okay,
so I want to get the context, class. So this was an instrument that was developed and administered, and data was collected But then when the data was collected, the student didn't understand how to make sense of the data and so called for help, right? And I was able to help in that sense where I said, okay, this is how you put them in the subscales and this is what you do. But this is the exact instrument that was administered as part of the practicum. And I'm doing it because I want you guys to learn from this experience and to see how you can do things, you know, differently for your practicum if you decide to go quantitative. Yeah, so continue, Tremaine.
Yeah. So, so in that case, then we said that this introduction was a bit vague, and it was just something to put there because you needed to have an introduction.
And what would you suggest, though? What would your team suggest?
Some of the suggestions we had was possibly to include statements like there would be no reward for completing this survey, or if there is a reward. Also, probably to tell people this survey may take you 15 minutes to complete. So you start to set the expectation from the get-go. And also just to beef it up a little bit, like just for people to be interested in completing the survey.
Okay.
And to give a little bit of reason for doing it, rather than just say to complete an MSc human development practicum. We thought it didn't prepare the person enough for what was to come, especially because of the length of the survey. So on the bat, if I was to just get that to do it, I may not have been drawn to, you know, to go through it unless the intro drew me to be interested into going further into answering the questions or looking further at what the questions were asking me.
The thing doesn't tell you how it benefits the organization. So you know, this is supposed to be an onboarding survey for an organization. This is to improve the organization's functioning. It doesn't tell you that anywhere here. It tells you what is going to happen for the student. The student is going to complete her MSc practicum and walk away. So we didn't think that what we said is that she ticked the boxes but didn't tick them well. That is what we said. So that the introduction needed some work. The title needed some work. We felt that they didn't sell the document well enough.
Right. And so for me, the only thing I saw that kind of gave me a sense of what was to happen here was onboarding. And even with that, you know, not everybody understands what onboarding is, right?
We talked about that, but we looked at the people at the end who were supposed to fill this out, senior management and those sorts of persons, and we felt that they would. On the other hand, maybe not if they're not in HR. They might not if they're not in HR, but we felt that we understood what she was saying because we are in HR.
Yes.
So there were some issues in the sections, but it's because we're in HR, we understand what she's trying to say. She didn't actually say those things.
One of the things we looked at, sir, was the terminologies used, and we go back to the whole word onboarding, and there was another word being used in one of the items.
Socialization.
Socialized. And we realized that the survey obviously would have been administered from management level to support staff level, based on the section E, I think it was, the last section, where it told you the category of persons that may possibly be responding to this questionnaire. And so the terminologies, as Olivine said, maybe persons in management would recognize it, but not necessarily the administrative staff or the support staff, because generally people don't use the terms onboarding or socialization when they talk about coming into an organization. The more popular term would be orientation. So to use terminologies that whatever cross section of persons are going to answer will understand.
Good. So I hear that term socialization, and in fact, socialization is a subset of this whole process of onboarding, right? So you'll find, if you look to the end of the document, that is one of the subscales that she was trying to develop. In fact, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So there are 5 items in this scale that she was seeking to measure socialization, right? Hence, you would have found it somewhere in the body of the instrument, you know, that term being introduced there. But good observations, good observations. I want to hear from group 4. What were their thoughts on the intro? Because there are some other things that I think we could have there.
Sir, to be honest, we had said that we needed some more, like, to explain the whole study a little bit more. We had also said that it's just vague, like, and if you're not really telling the person who is answering the questionnaire what you intend to do, you might not even get the right answers for the survey, the answers that you're looking for. You might not even get it because all you're telling me is that this is just something that's going to be confidential and administered to help complete my practicum. That's nothing really to me explaining the true purpose of this study. So we actually looked into that also, sir. Yeah, that's what our thoughts were on that.
Good. Giovanni, you kind of hinted on something there, which I didn't see also. Instructions. There are no instructions.
Yeah.
And that's important. That's important. So do you want the person to tick a box, to put an X, to circle, to what?
Yeah.
That's important on the instrument.
By placing a tick under the option that you most agree with.
Yes. So the instruction is important. Just stating what's the purpose of, you know, collecting the data. What are you going to use it for? But also, so confidentiality is here, but the results will be used for the completion of the practicum. But also, do you assure the person that the data that you've collected will, for example, be only used for the purpose for which it was collected? Because that's important, you know.
Yeah.
That's important because as part of the ethical consideration, you should collect the data for only the intended purpose and no other purpose. And so you need to say that to the participants as well. Right?
We thought maybe a little bit more, just have a little bit more information in it so that the person we actually speaking to can have a better understanding.
Yes. So that's important. Those things that we've just highlighted are useful things. So we don't want to have a long epistle in the introduction, but at least when somebody, I think it was Debbie who said it, but when somebody sees the instrument, it should give them a sense of wanting to participate in the process, right? But also clearly explain, because sometimes, unlike qualitative research, the instrument is administered and you may not be there when the person is completing it, depending on how it is administered. And so the person needs some guidance, some instruction, but also to look back and to say, why is this person doing this thing? Or should I really complete it? Do I want to be a part of this thing? And sometimes you're not having a conversation with somebody that you can clarify. So things like those need to be there on the instrument. All right, good observations for the intro. For section A, and I think I heard somebody made reference or touch to the length of the instrument, which we need to have some conversation around. All right. So persons in group 3. So I'm going up the scale now. So persons in group 3, help us to understand what your conversation was about this section A of the instrument. Who are the persons in group 3?
Sir, could you give group 1? I finally figured out that I was in group 1. Could you give us an opportunity to answer here?
Group 1, okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So group 1 is answering now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Good. Good.
Okay, so when we looked at section A, in addition to the section being lengthy, we saw where quite a number of the questions were quite repetitive. A few of them were double-barreled in nature. So for instance, question 8, question 16, you had two statements being made in the same row that could be confusing and contribute to inaccurate data being collected for the purpose of the study.
All right, Catherine,
Yes, sir.
let me just stop you 1 minute there, because I've heard you use the term questions, and at one point I heard you use the word statement.
Statements, yes.
Yeah. So which one will you stick by for this conversation?
I'll stick by statements because most of them were done in statement form. I think the only one that was done in a question format was question 5.
Question 5. That's a
Right.
good observation. That's a good observation from you and your team.
Yes.
Because looking at how we're measuring, right? We're really asking statements. We should be posing statements.
Yes.
And so the correct way, for example, when we're talking, is to refer to them as items and not questions, right?
Okay.
Items or statements, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're right. So I want to continue this question though. You said that you found double barrels, for example, and I saw that too. And I questioned whether or not we should have 2 statements, for example, in the same row. So continue. You're going good.
Yes, sir. Question 8 as well, we felt could be even more suited as a yes or no response rather than using this Likert type question format. We found that question 9 was an incomplete item. There was nothing really to answer from there. It said the job functions clearly after the session concluded. We didn't quite understand, so it sounded incomplete. It wasn't clear, we believe.
A word was missing from it, it seemed.
Okay.
Yeah, so it seemed a word was missing.
Right, question 17. It says, I was given a tour of the facility that made me more aware of where departments were located. We felt that this could be reworded to focus more on having the respondents speak about the quality of the tour rather than whether it was actually done. So this kind of, in a sense, was double-barreled in nature, because it says I was given a tour of the facility. That's almost asking one question, and then the second part of it was asking what the tour was doing or the quality of the tour that allowed them to look at where other departments were located. So that could have been reworded for improvement.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, sorry, it was pretty repetitive. We feel some of the questions. Just jumping back on what Debbie would have said about she mentioned socialization. Question 23, we had a problem with. I was socialized to do the job by my manager or direct supervisor, and we felt that that was very vague, because it could have been explained more for the purpose of the study, to get more accurate responses.
Yes, and so, for example, if you remember when we started the class, and I think it was either the first or second class, and we spoke about things like conceptualization or operationalization. So this word socialized, what exactly does socialized mean?
Right.
To the person who's filling this out, what does the word socialized mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, socialized could mean several things. And so even in this context, though the person who is developing the instrument understands what socialized means, but also has to put self into the realm of the person who is completing the instrument to always question, will the person know or understand what I'm asking? Right? So as you go about, you always have to understand what is being asked. Look at item 22 though. I received a copy of the vision and the mission. What if the person only received the vision and the mission, or the vision or the mission?
So that's a double-barreled as well, sir.
Right? But I think you rightly said, because an item like this is either yes or no, but it is actually on a Likert scale. Yeah. So it is either yes or no. You get a copy or you don't get a copy.
Right.
Yeah. So measuring on strongly agree, strongly disagree does not cut it. All right. So thanks, Katharina.
Welcome.
Okay. Let me hear from group 2, persons from group 2, still talking about section B, section A, I should say. Any observations from section A from group 2?
Yes, sir. So in addition to what Katharina had mentioned, we noticed that they also added neither agree nor disagree. And based on our reading, we thought that that question shouldn't be included, but rather force them to give a definite answer whether they agree or disagree. We also added that.
Trisha, stick up in there. You made a good point or a good observation. But in item development or instrument development or skill development, this option of neither agree or what sometimes is called neutral, depending on the intent of your research as well as the design or the methodology that you're using, it may have some good or it could go the other way. So if you think, for example, and first choice is always good, because then it helps in terms of the quality of the data sometimes. But if you're thinking, for example, of a mixed method study, for example, it somewhat helps when if you see a trend of neutral, because sometimes people don't want to say things, and as such they go silent. And so as a researcher, you can also pick up on the number of instances when people say they're neutral about something, and you can somewhat read into that and then start an inquiry from that, right? So
right.
It depends
but,
on
based on these questions, you should force a response based on the type of questions here. So you do not want to use neutral in this
Or
case.
maybe if they're going to have the neutral section, it means that they do not agree because of some reason and they do not agree because of another reason. But how are we going to know what reasons are those? So we were saying we could suggest, I don't know if this is appropriate for the Likert scale, if they're going to add that section of it and a person remain neutral, we could ask them. Right.
Yeah, so the point is taken there. Why I actually threw that one in though is to not for this purpose as we're talking about, but for us to also think about, in other pieces of work that we're doing, whether or not it makes sense to include that neutral or to not, or to give them a forced choice, right? So that's the reason why I've included it there. Marsha, you're saying something else?
I was just saying that you'd try to force a response based on the type of questions. Because you can neither disagree or agree whether you were prepared. I mean, is either you were prepared or not, you force a response by not giving them that option.
Okay. Now, as you spoke, Marsha, something else came to my mind, because if you remember, at the beginning of the conversation or throughout the conversation, so one of the things we spoke about was what is the research problem or issue? And Giovanni, if you go back to that article that Anthony Auerbuser wrote at et al., he speaks about, so he opens by talking about the research problem, right? And so that research problem is going to inform the purpose as well as the research questions that you're setting out to answer. And inherent in that is going to be, so what instrument am I going to develop to collect data to ultimately answer the research questions before me, right? So the instrument that is developed, you're gonna have to think through, okay, so what questions do I need answers for? And how is the best way to collect the data, meaningful data, that then allows me to get the responses or to get the answers that I'm looking for, right? So again, this is part of how you make the connection. So this instrument is a part of that process, or an input into seeking answers for the research questions. Right? Now, one other thing to take note of is that in developing the instrument, you have to look at the response options that you have in front of you. And I've sent you literature on designing different scales or using different scales. You must look at the response options and ensure that the items match the response options. I've seen too many times where the instruments that people, even with established research companies, the items and the response options do not match. And that can invalidate the process, right? So you need to make sure that the response options and the items or the statements that are being posed, there is some correlation or there's some synchronization that's taking place there. Right? All right, so good observation on section A.
Sir, another point with that one. So since they are using the interval, right, with the Likert scale, it's all about categorizing. And since it's so lengthy and they're asking different sets of questions, we were thinking they should have categorized each, like the questions, so that when they're analyzing the data, it would be much easier that way.
Trisha Gay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for raising this, because several things came in my head. Okay, so again, it's a lack of thought. It's a lack of thought. So when I show you the data set, for example, or if you look at the end of the instrument, you see where there was the identification of what items would match with subscale, because in this 22 items, in this first part of the instrument with 23 items, there are about 7, I think, subscales. And what I also noted, I think, in fact, there was an item that stood by itself. So let me just look back on my computer here. I think culture, there was only one item for culture. There's only one item for resource. And I also had to point out that there was an overlap with efficacy, because efficacy and socialization were being measured. And I said, you can't have one item that is measuring both efficacy and socialization. You must fit it somewhere in one of the subscales. there's another item that was seeking to measure two things. So I think it was the same self-esteem and something else. So that's one of the things to also take note of, right? So good observation. Now you raise something which goes into the realm of levels of measurement. And I want, and Trisha, since you're on the floor, you can help me to understand this. So last week, I spoke about a scale, and we've been talking about the levels of measurement, the nominal, the ordinal, the interval, the ratio. So we have 23 items here, or 23 statements. What would be the level of measurement if we're thinking about them item by item?
Item by item. For section A. Sir, I'm not hearing you. You're on mute.
So if you notice, there are 23 items. So this one, for example, the human resource officers were prepared for orientation meetings. And then the second one, information were received in advance about the time and location of the session. So if we take these by themselves, what level of measurement would these items be individually?
You know, I'm not so sure.
All right, ask somebody else in your group or call on somebody else in your group.
Giovanni.
What's the question, sir?
So we're looking still at this instrument, and we're looking at them item by item, and I'm saying what level of measurement would each item be?
Oh, each item, as in the question.
As in, yes, the quote-unquote question. They're not questions, though. They're items or statements. The statements. Or they should be statements.
Sir, I have to go wheel and come again on that one, sir.
All right, choose somebody else.
So, sir, it's not in any order or anything. We could just say it's nominal because it's not in any sequence or anything. Just asking.
Why would you say it's nominal, though?
So
look at the entire row. Look at the entire row. Look at the entire row. So let us focus on this one, for example, right? Look at the entire row. So just don't look at that, but look at the entire row.
So nominal, you say assign numbers with no meaning. Simple naming the categories.
But listen, no, this is. Cause
it's not in any order or anything, so I don't know if I'd say ordinal. Cause they're just there.
But look at this. Look at the options. So you have to look at the statement and the options.
Yeah.
Sir. Sir, are you talking about all of section A?
No.
Oh.
So what I wanted to focus on. So if I were to ask you, so this very first one, the human resource officers were prepared for orientation meeting, right? And then it gives the option: strongly agree, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. What level of measurement would that be? Ordinal.
Yeah.
Right. So it
I was focusing on the item, not the response.
Right. So you look at the item and the response. So for example, we saw earlier where gender and stuff, and that would be an example of nominal, right? So it's the same thing here, but this one. So each of the items would be measured on an ordinal. I heard somebody say ratio earlier. No, it's not ratio. So each item is measured on an ordinal level, at an ordinal level. But if we're to think about the entire section A, so note now the entire section A. So we're looking at statement or items 1 through 23. What level of measurement could that be?
So they're all.
Sir,
So we're looking at everything now. We're looking at everything now.
Sir, I'm still sticking with ordinal, sir.
It looked like it could be nominal to me, sir. It could be either yes or
we're
no.
ruling out nominal. No, we're ruling out nominal now. So we're looking at the entire section A, including the options, the response options.
Sir, I said.
Thank you very much for that question, but it's ordinal.
Yeah, ordinal, sir.
Okay. All right. So last week I'd promised, and Trisha, in fact, I should have sent it with the set of stuff, right? But I also wanted to, when you get some time to look through, and there is one of the piece of reading, I think there's one with 5 pages that actually helps with this response. So let me find out which one of them it is and tell you, or in the interest of time. So when you, for example, get the chance to aggregate all of the data in this scale, which is, I'm using the term scale to mean everything in section A, right? So I'm calling it a scale, and in it there are subscales. So earlier we spoke about socialization, and socialization is a subscale. I think communication is in there, and communication is subscale. So the different subscales will make up the entire scale. So in this scale, which contains 23 items or statements, if we sum them or aggregate the entire data set, it can come to what is known as interval data, right? Now, later down, I'm going to actually show you how I was able to aggregate the data set for the student. And so we get one overall.
Repeat that statement about interval.
Give me 1 minute. So we get one overall score, right? So what I'm saying is that, and this is where, if you remember last week, I was saying that there's a lot of debate and tension and stuff in the literature around Likert scales, for example, and whether it is ordinal or interval, and which is why I've raised this point. So the items themselves, they are considered, they're measuring ordinal, or they're measuring at an ordinal level of measurement, right? But if we sum everything that we have here, right, there are proponents who say that when we're able to sum everything, it gives us interval level data, right? Now the caution though is that even though we consider it to be interval level data, we still have to do some sorts of testing and checking, for example, to ensure that we can do certain types of statistics or certain types of analyses, for example. So I think in one of the videos that we watched, we were introduced to parametric and non-parametric type data. I don't know if anybody remember that. Right? But it's one of the things to go and do some checking on. And it really has to do with skewness and all of those things, right? So depending on and let me see how best to say this so as not to confuse anyone. When we go to look at the types of statistical analysis, SPSS, for example, or other statistical packages, they will give you, and just statistics in general, will give you different options. So if your data is normal, for example, then there are certain statistical techniques that you can use. And if your data is non-normal, so we're talking about the normal curve now, right? So if your data is normal, there are certain statistical techniques that you can use. And if it is non-normal, then there are others that you need to use. Now, there are ways of what we call normalizing the data or allowing it to be parametric, which means that your statistical techniques can be better. In a short while, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about, right? So we're going to do a correlation, and I'm going to actually show you the different options. So just bear with me. Just remember that we had a conversation around parametric and non-parametric data, right? But I've raised the point because even though we aggregate the data or we sum the data and we're treating it as an interval for the purpose of the statistics or the analysis, there are persons who will say the original data set or the original data that you collected was not interval data, but it was a process of conversion that carried us to this point of making it interval, right? So there's some data that you collect. For example, somebody's age. So if, for example, you ask them, how old are you? And they say, I'm 20, for example, then that's it. Or, so in one of the data sets that I did for one of the classes probably about last year or 2 years before, I gave them a mini test. And just as part of in fact, it is a data set that you guys have on Orville. And what I did was I gave them a mini test. And I was looking at, so I was measuring seeking to measure their personality type, their research efficacy, and also the scores that they got on test throughout the course. So I gave them a mini test, took it home, marked it, and then gave them a number grade. And that number grade was an interval level type data. And so I used that, looked at their personality scores and other scores, and then did some analysis and showed them how it is that they could make meaning of the data that we collected. So it made sense to them because they saw me collect it. I showed them exactly, how I translated and transformed the data. For the purpose of this conversation, since we're using this instrument, I'm going to use the same data set to show you what I'm talking about, right? So the point there is that if you've collected data that was actually from the inset meant to be interval data, some statisticians will argue with you less versus if you collected data using a Likert scale and then had to sum it and then call it interval data. So on an item level or on a statement level, it's ordinal, but if you sum it, you can actually argue that through that process, you've actually then converted it to interval data, right? But there's a whole lot of discussion and debate around it. And it is why last week I said, depending on who you're having the conversation with, they will argue with you that it's not truly interval data, right?
And how summing it would, I'm not getting how summing it would, what interpretation would you get from summing it?
All right, so when I go to run the statistics, you're gonna see how the summation has worked out, right? So hold that thought until we go to SPSS. I'm gonna show you how to do it in SPSS, right?
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. So let us move on to look at section B. So here I'm seeing open-ended questions. And then I question the person, for example. So what was the intent here? Yeah. And what it would actually is suggesting to me is that the person was probably embarking on a mixed methods research, because here you have open-ended, you know, questions, which means that the respondent was intended to type something, write something, and then that data will be collected and then analyzed qualitatively. So section B is not meant to be quantitative at all. Did anybody pick that up?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So section B was meant to be quantitative at all. It was meant to be qualitative. Right? So here, what this person actually did was developed a mixed methods instrument, but the intention was not to do a mixed methods. Yeah.
My group actually stated that there, we thought it was a mixed method survey, so we made that conclusion because of section B.
You're right. So on the surface, it is because of the introduction of these open-ended questions or items. But when I spoke to the student, that was the intention. Yeah. So just be careful. Right? Section C. So I want to hear from group 3. I think I heard from 1, 2, or did I hear from 2? Did I hear from 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I didn't hear from 3. So group 3, quickly help us to understand what was the conversation around section C? Did you find any issue there? Who are the group 3 people now? All right, anybody just chip in. What was the observation with section C?
Sir, my group was well, for level of measurement, level of measurement, sir, we're saying interval for section C. We didn't really look into it too much because time was gonna finish. But we were concluding that the level of measurement here would have been interval.
But was there any consistency though in what was being asked for, or the response options? Was there any consistency?
No, sir.
We thought it was ordinal.
Yeah, there is some ordinal there, but the point though, and I'm the person who asked about this summation, I'm going to show you how this would not make any sense to the student initially, because for the fact that there's no consistency in the response options. First of all, you can't be looking at the items by themselves. So the statistics or the statisticians will tell you you can't look on items by themselves unless you're doing what is known as an ordinal regression. So there's ordinal regression that actually allows you to do an item analysis, right? But apart from that, you really shouldn't be analyzing the items by themselves. You should be analyzing the items collectively, or you should be making meaning of the items collectively, but not individually, right? So with having them like this, different response options, again, this just wasted the participants' time. And this is also one of the things we spoke about ethical consideration, I think, in week 2. These are part of the ethical considerations you have to observe, because you don't want to go collecting data that you're not going to use, because already the instrument is long, right? And the individual will have spent, you know, valuable time contributing to it or completing the instrument, but you end up don't use the data, right? So you have to look at that because you don't want not to use the data, but you also don't want to add undue burden to the person in seeking to complete the instrument, which is why we suggest, for example, to plan out what you're going to ask and try and have instruments that are pointed. Not all of them can be brief, but are pointed, right? Which is why your piloting is important, right? All right, section D, which is demographics.
Sir.
Which is really not demographics either. Yes, Sasha.
So before you go to section D, for section C, my group, which was group 3, we thought that number 3 under section 3 was a bit out of place because we couldn't see the relationship between the question and the topic of the survey.
So I received my first paycheck on time with this one?
Yes, sir.
Oh, so it's a part of the onboarding process as well. So like even at work, when I'm doing this exercise, one of the things I would ensure is that I collect the requisite banking information from the person, sometimes before or on the day. And so one of my prerogatives is to make sure that that person is put on the system. And also I communicate with the payroll section that, so send the contract or the other documents, but also indicate that this is the banking details for the person.
Right, but sir, they probably could ask the question a different way.
I agree.
Probably to see if the documents were collected in a timely manner to catch the payroll deadline.
Yeah. But the truth also is that and it's probably not appropriate here, but there are some persons who, again, based on the system and stuff, and sometimes the tiredness of the organization, which if it's probably a new person, the person does not get paid or paid on time. So you may want to, and part of it is also you're looking at the experience that the person had, right? In the bigger picture. So again, for some organizations, and like for my organization, it depends on when the person is in. So for some persons, we may give an advance, for example, a salary advance, if it's not, depending on when they're coming. So part of it, I think the person wanted to capture was what was the overall experience of this new recruit.
Okay, because just looking at the question, we thought, whoa, that's a bit, off. But now that you explain it,
it was seeking, and I think it may have been, it may go to, because the student was actually trying to measure culture, and so I think that probably could fit into part of the culture. I don't know, but I think the person is looking at the overall experience of the new recruit, because as you would know, we have to make sure that the first impressions are right as part of this onboarding process.
Okay.
And if, for example, you have a new hire, probably fresh out of school, fresh out of college, and the first instance is, or the first experience is that I didn't get paid. I didn't have enough money and stuff, but I was expecting my little pay and I didn't get it and stuff. That just never goes away. You'll always remember that.
Okay. Another thing that we noted as well with section C, you can go back up to number 1 under section C. We're saying that there were no, instructions under section C to say how you should answer the question. So should you circle it? Should you tick it? Should you underline it? Should you select more than one answers?
Good observation. So I'm using this practical example to show you that this is what you guys must not do. These are the mistakes that you guys must not do. Now, Well, it spoke last week again. If you want to do Mrs. Martin Halls or Dr. Martin Halls, practicum. These are some of the things that should beat you over the head for. Yeah? So just take notes. Yeah? All right. So section D, was section D appropriate? Sasha, since you're on the floor, do you think section D was appropriate?
Well, we didn't get to look much at section D because at the time. Let me look at it. If you welcome.
Because the other thing as I look through, you see, is that I found some repetition in the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the times, let me add, repetition is not always bad, because you want to ensure that there is consistency in the response that the respondent is giving. So that's a kind of technique to build into an item, because if they respond one way to one item, then you want to see if they're paying attention and would respond in the same way to another item that is worded in a kind of different way, but is asking the same thing. So when you assess instruments, for example, you may find some of that, and it is probably in some instances deliberate by the developer of the instrument. But you shouldn't find it too much though. Olivina, see open mic there. Sasha is thinking. You wanted to add something?
Actually, I was gonna ask you if we could have a 10-minute break. A couple of people have asked.
Yes.
A couple of people have asked.
Sure. All right, so we break, and listen guys, last week I felt so bad because you probably know we recognize that I'll just talk, research. So please always remind me when it is your break time and ask for your break, okay? All right, so we're taking a 10 minutes break. When we come back, I'm gonna actually show you guys, you know, how to start preparing for the analysis, all right? So we come back at 8:15. Persons up probably about a minute. That I'd show you how to start preparing your data. And so if you look in the chat, I've actually sent you something. So if you go, for example, and go on YouTube and look for Little's missing at random test, What that is so for example, when you collect the data set in whichever form, and so in this instance, the student collected the data using, I think Google Forms or what's the other survey thing there? Survey Monkey and stuff. It can be used, right? But, or whichever way you collect the data, you will find that sometimes some of the data is missing, which means persons did not respond to some items, right? So earlier we were talking about the strongly agree, the option of neutral or neither agree, neither disagree. So there are sometimes when people don't respond to some items, right? And so you sometimes, well, you can't ignore those, right? Or you shouldn't ignore those. So you should, in your data cleaning process, take control of some of those things. Now, that test that I've actually pointed you to helps you to understand whether the data is missing completely at random, because if the data is missing completely at random, it's no big deal. But if the data is missing at random, then, well, not missing at random, then you have to think through whether or not you're going to get the right results from the data set, right? So you always run that test to see whether or not the data is missing completely at random. I've put this one up here just to point out some things to you. So if you notice, for example, in row 17, are we seeing the screen, by the way, this Excel sheet?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right. So if you notice in row 17, I've highlighted, this is participant number 16, and this was actually the true data that I collected from the class. As I pointed out earlier, so I gave them a mini test, and this was the test score. I think it was out of 25, right? And I was measuring, so there's an instrument I developed, and I've been administering it to different classes, and it is an instrument to try and understand the efficacy of the students in relation to research. So there are items on it that talk about quantitative research, their confidence in doing aspects of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods research. By now, I've seen some amount of reliability in the instrument, but what I found is that this participant, it would seem, did not take a lot of time to read the items, and so just check. And so what I'm seeing, so the highest end is 10, which means a perfect score, or is all in agreement. And this person responds 10, 9, 10, 10, 10, 10, 8, 8, 8, 10, 10, 8, 10, 8, and go on. So if you notice, there's a trend that is telling me that this person is not paying attention. Now, if you look in these two columns here that I've highlighted, what I've also done is to ask the students, so what score do you think you will get on the exam? And just in general, what is the average score you have gotten on any research test or, doing research? And so here again, the person says 100. So the person hopes to get 100 in the final exam. And this person has gotten 100% in all research type, interventions. So this raises a red flag for me. Because what it is saying is that the student did not spend enough time to look at what was being asked of him or her. And so this is an ideal case for not including this participant in the data set, because you're gonna get outliers, right? So this is the reason why I've pointed this out, right? Here you have up here this person this person has indicated 100%, and that's fine, because if you're you know, so confident, then you could think you're going to get 100% in the exam if you study and do all of those nice things. And that's not a problem for me, because when I look here, I'm actually seeing that the person is in fact, it would seem, spending some time to look at what the items are and responding appropriately, right? So I just pointing that out to say that these are some of the things you need to take note of. Here is a missing data. Here, this person did not respond to these. But by and large, there are responses. This portion is about the personality scale, right? Now, there is also something that I picked up in this scale that I wanted to point out. So here's a transposition. So 23, so if you notice, everything else in this data set is single digit. Only this one is saying 23. So something has gone wrong here in the inputting of the data in this Excel spreadsheet. And so what this means is that you have to go back to the instruments, which is why, for example, when you administer a survey, you need to give each instrument a unique identification, right? Because when you're back tracing, you should be able to go back and say, okay, this is instrument number 1, and I'm looking for this particular item to look what went wrong. So this should either be 2 or 3. It shouldn't be 23. It should either be 2 or 3, right? So the cleaning of the data is important before you run any statistics, because with things like these, it could throw your results out, right? So just take note of these. So here, and if you give me 1 minute. So if you go on YouTube, for example, to show you, give you examples of how to prepare your data. So I soon come to you, I think that is Sophia, that may be Sophia, or the person who, so here, for example, this is the ID number. So this is saying student number 1, student number 2, student number 3, student number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, down to 50. So this is saying to you, okay, what's the number of participants that I have in my data set, right? And so just as we went through the instrument earlier, and we saw a section A, and we saw an item for item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 23 in the first section. So you'd enter that data for person number 1 vertically, right? Across. It's the same way that SPSS or its sister software is going to be accepting the data. What's useful to note is that everything has to be converted into numbers. No words should be there. And so a code book is also very useful in the conversation. So for example, here, there's data about gender. And so in this instance, male, and for male it's 1, for female it's 2. If we're collecting age group, data based on age group, we have to assign a number based on the age group, right? This test that was being done, a part of it was personality scale. And so you will see also based on this, that there are different subscales: agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, openness, and also extroversion. And it shows you, for example, which of the items, so this item is a 44 item scale with 5 subscales. And so it shows you which of the items are in fact measuring which subscale and which are reversed coded as well. Somebody asked earlier about the kind of like putting to, or not asked, but pointed out that the items could be kind of put together so you see what's related. Not necessarily. So they could be at different points in the scale, but you just need to note which item is measuring what. Right? So that's a point to note. Okay, somebody is chiming in. Let me hear you now. Somebody is saying, sir.
Sophia.
Yes, you said we were to make note of those things, but after making note, what would we do? We take it out? Do we still consider it? What should we do with that?
So, for example, in this instance where we saw where the person, this which I have highlighted, I took out, before running the data set, I took out this person. Because what it clearly means is that this person did not take time to look, to answer the thing correctly.
But look, so at person number 21 with straight ones across.
21.
Person number 21, yeah. No, person number 20 then. Person number 20.
Yes, yes. Thanks for pointing that one out to Olivine. Because that one I take out of the data set as well. Yeah? Now the thing about it too is that, and this one is obvious, right? But the other thing is that this person could actually be saying that I know nothing, 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 right? So that could be one interpretation as well. But even with that though, this person is also going to be an outlier. So I wouldn't keep this person in the data set either. So before you run the analysis, you have to look for things like these, right? And there's a technique called Winsorizing, which actually helps with this. There are some persons who would suggest do not remove some responses from the data set, but do what is known as Winsorizing. And some will say remove it from the data set. What is obvious though is that you will get outliers. And so for some statistical analyses, one of the assumptions is that you do not have any outliers. So you have to be careful at the outset to decide whether or not you're going to include, because it's obvious that you could get outliers if you're not careful.
But yeah? We're talking about the paradigms, you know, and you're saying that to be true to what the people say. The fact is that the people are not saying what you want them to say. So somebody has answered the thing carelessly. The fact is they've given an answer, or somebody has been contrary. They've given an answer. So, you know, I think maybe don't take anything out and take it for what it is. If your data set is big enough, then those one or two persons shouldn't influence it so negatively.
So negatively. That's the point, Olivine. But they still will come out as outliers.
And yeah, so, but even in society, no, but in any society, there are outliers.
Yes.
In any normal curve, there are outliers.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Olivine, because what it then says is it then goes back into a cycle to figure out why is it that you had these outliers, for example. So it could open a nice discussion about why these outliers existed in the data set. Yeah?
Sorry, question.
Yes.
So you're saying in the case of those two examples, those that data set is not missing at random.
Just looking at it, it's not missing at random because it's just little spots that you see, versus if you had a whole section where people didn't respond. So I probably wouldn't even go the route of doing Little's NCR test, because just looking at, just eyeballing it, I've seen that data is missing at random. Yeah, but in a big data set, you may not observe, because this is a very small data set as compared to data sets that you have thousands and thousands of participants, and you may not have the time to go and eyeball everything. So a test like that, which I've actually suggested, will help you to determine what needs to happen. Yeah.
So, sir, in the case where you have the 23, what did you call it? Transposition? where you have the 23 that you said should have been either a 2 or a 3.
Oh.
Would you take that one out as well?
So what happens is that you'd have to go back, and it's not really transposition, because transposition is really take, for example, you should have one number and you have but what happened is that in the inputting, it should either be 2 or 3, but 23 went there. So you'd have to go back to the instrument and see what was the actual response, and then correct that. Which is why you don't discard of the instruments, but you will keep them, because you have to go back and do your checks. And which is why you give a unique number to each instrument, because it makes it better for you to go back and check each for that particular item as well, right? The caution though is don't leave it like that, right? All right. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you some. So we've been talking about designs, for example, so descriptive and the relational and the comparative. So I'm going to show you examples of these three designs using SPSS as a statistical analysis or a tool. So this is a data set of for the instrument that we just saw. So the person actually had 14 participants, or got responses from 14 participants, right? So there was somebody who asked about, or who was unclear about aggregating. I spoke about aggregating, for example, and there's somebody who was unclear about what I meant, right? So I'm gonna.
No, it wasn't about just the word aggregating. It was in relation to the statements in section A, and what would aggregating them, what interpretation would aggregating them bring? Because you were making the debate about whether or not it's a nominal or I think it's ratio or interval, something like that. You were making
ordinal or interval.
Right.
I'm glad you clarified that for me, because so let me just go back to the beginning of this data set. So I'm widening these columns so you can see. All right. So are you seeing where, for example, I have prep? Are you seeing prep there?
Yes.
All right. So let me just find from that instrument that you just looked at. I coded it so I could know what prep means. And so on the very last, prep means preparation of HR organization, new hire. And so she said, the person said questions 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, and 18 are meant to capture information about the preparation of HR for the new hires, right? And as such, I coded those prep. So 1, 2, 4, 7, as the person has said, 8 and 18. Now also notice I gave them numbers. So this is actually item number 18 on the instrument in section A, and it is measuring the preparation of HR, right? Now let me go to further down. So here you will note that I have a column or a subscale. So what I've done is that I've summed all of those. So I've summed items 1, 3, 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, and 18. Right? And equally, I've summed those that are meaning to measure communication, length of time. So lot means length of time. SOC here is for socialization. So what I've done is that I've actually identified the subscales in the instrument and I've summed them. Now, to the point that is on the floor here, when I do a correlation, you're gonna actually see how these will work, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to correlate, see if there's any correlation between the communication, the preparation, the length of time, the socialization, the expectation, the role clarity, for example, right? So that is how we would make meaning of this bit of data from the instrument. So COM, prep, lot, SOC, all of these are representing the aggregated information or set of results from the 23 items that we saw in section A. And what I've further done is that, so here, total perception is adding from COM straight down to RCA. RCA means role clarity alignment, right? And so here in this total column, I've summed all of these because that can also help us to do another type of analysis. Is that making sense to the person who was asking the question?
It's Debbie, sir, and yes.
Debbie, right. So Debbie, when I run a correlation, you're going to see why you need why we needed here this. So here, what is actually happening now, is that we have, in summing it, we have now arrived at interval data. So this is the point I was making. We couldn't use the items of themselves, but what we've done is that we've identified the subscales and we've summed them. And so that allows us to make meaning from the data which was collected. Again, this is what the student couldn't do or didn't really understand how to do, right? All right, so how to sum them though class is that you'd go to this area, transform, and you would compute variables. So take, for example, if I wanted prep, so I say prep, I'm going to say prep 1, right? Because I already have a prep. So prep 1, and so we said that we need item 1. If I hover it, I'll see item 1. So I'll click on that, bring it over, add. We also need item 2, which is this one, bring it over. We also need item 4, which is this one, bring it over. I think we need 7, right? Bring it over. We need 8 as well. And we also need 18. Let me see here, from 18. Okay, this one. And we press OK. Now, if I go back to the data set, you notice something happened here, prep 1. Yes.
Decimal places.
Huh?
The decimal places.
Right, but we could take that out. We could take that out because at the end here, so this is decimal place. So there are 2 tabs here, the data view and the variable view. So we could take out that by doing this. And so the decimal places are gone, right? So this is how we'd actually aggregate. So when we're aggregating or summing, we'd have to go to this column to complete variables, right? Now, so.
Sir, just another question. So if it is that your data set was way larger than this, that's the same procedure you'll have to go through if you had to be selecting. Okay.
But we'll be jumping for joy at a bigger data set. Yeah.
I didn't hear that. Say that again, sir.
We'd be jumping for joy if we had a bigger data set. Because this data set is woefully inadequate, right? So here, what we could do if we want to say, look at some correlations, not correlations, some crosstabs. So what if I wanted to find out the relationship between, and I already had them here, so let me bring them back over. Gender, for example, and the categories. So at the bottom of the instrument, you noted that there's male and female as well as the different groupings in the organization. So what if I wanted to know, you know, what that is? So here I'm seeing for senior managers, there was no female senior manager. There are 5 administrative techs. There are 2 support, 1 other, right? There are 2 male senior managers, 3 administrative, 0 support, 1 other. And then I get the count. So there are 2 senior managers who participated, 8 administrative technical, 2 support, and 2 other, which would make the 14 persons, right? Notice N here is suggesting or indicating that 14 people participated in the research, as we've seen from this data set. So it comes back, right? So if you remember, we're talking about the descriptive design, and I was saying that you could look at how much, how many, what percentage of, what's the number of, all of those things, right? You could get simple statistics from that, yeah? So that if the person had a descriptive design research question, simple statistics going on the analyze descriptive. So here, descriptive statistics, you can do several things. So you can look at your mean, your mode, your standard deviation, all of those things can be calculated from one of these 2 options, right? Or you could do a crosstab as we just did earlier, right? So that's it from the side of the descriptive design. What if we wanted to do a correlation? In that regard, and this Debbie, is how we're going to make sense of the data that we're just talking about. So here we could do a correlation, and so we go down same. So a lot of the analysis that you'll do is found under the Analyze tab, right? So your Analyze tab is your best friend in SPSS here. So if we go to correlate, and correlate is going to be linking with the relational design that we spoke about earlier, right? One of the options to use. So we could go bivariate. And here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use all of these, which I had summed up earlier. I'm going to leave out the prep one though. I'm going to leave out the total perception as well. So communication, the preparation and stuff, and I'm going to put them all over. So what I did earlier was just press shift and highlighted all of them. I'm going to bring all of them over, right? Now, if you remember, I was talking about parametric and non-parametric tests. So here in SPSS, it identifies for you different test options. So if, for example, your data is not normal, then there are statistical techniques for you to use. And if they are non-normal, or if they're normal, there are statistical techniques. So if your data is normal, for example, you should use Pearson's correlation as a statistical technique. If it is that your data is non-normal, then it is better that you use Spearman-Rowe to do this particular test of looking at whether there's correlation. So it's a simple test. Two-tail is always checked. And all we need to do here is to run the test. So here's the output. Now, if you notice the output here, we see parametric, non-parametric correlation and parametric. So this one is a parametric and this one is a non-parametric. So if you noted earlier, we had checked Spearman-Rowe. This is the output for Spearman-Rowe. So here it is. The box actually says Spearman-Rowe. And for this one, it actually tells us Pearson's correlation, right? They usually, it's just a slight difference in terms of the output, but it does mean something. Because as I said, for some statistical techniques or some statistical tests, the assumption is that the data should be normally distributed. And if you violate that assumption, then what it says is that you have to do and choose a more appropriate test, right? So that's a whole different conversation, and which I wanted to do some reading up about the normalcy of the data versus the data not being normal. There are ways to actually get the data to be normal, right? And probably I'll share an article, or not an article, a YouTube video that I found to be very useful that actually helps you. In fact, it's one of the things that I did quite a number of kind of just looking through for the PhD I'm using, and that technique actually helped me in understanding how to normalize data that are non-normal. So I'll share it with you as well. So here, if we're looking at this correlation table, what it is actually suggesting to us, or not suggesting, but telling us, is that there is actually a correlation between the communication and the preparation for HR persons, or the HR person. So here, this is saying there is a correlation between the communication and the preparation, which is 0.613. Now, if you see this star here, what it is actually suggesting is that also it is of significance. So there are two things to actually look at when you're interpreting this data set. Here, you want to look at the strength of the correlation, as well as you want to the strength and the direction of the correlation, as well as the significance. So if we focus on this 0.613, what we're seeing is that there is a positive correlation between the communication that takes place and the preparation of the HR person, right? It is positive because we're not seeing a negative sign beside it, right? So what it is actually saying is that as the communication increases, the preparation also is increasing. The preparation efforts of this HR person is increasing, right? If it were negative, what it would be saying is that as communication increases, the preparation of the HR person is decreasing, which probably don't make any sense, right? So here it is a positive relation that is taking place, a positive correlation. Now, does this make any sense? To me, it does, because of the significance that we're seeing there. So we're seeing that the significance level is a two-tail. So if you look at this box down here, so we either should look at a significance of 0.05, significance of 0.05 level, or a 0.01. So if you remember last week, we're having a conversation around the level of accuracy that we want with an instrument. or the likelihood of making an error with whatever. So for example, if it's an instrument that is testing, you know, somebody's health or stuff, you want to be 100% or close to 100% accurate. In this instance, what this is actually saying to us is that the correlation is significant because it is below 0.05. So any result below 0.05 is saying that it is something worth considering. So here, this correlation between the total communication and the preparation of the HR person is actually a good one. If we look at the communication and socialization, so this SOC is seeking to measure socialization, we're also seeing that it's good, for the fact that this is saying that there's a positive correlation or relationship between the communication that takes place and the socialization that is being seen on the ground. And it is significant as well, right? Here, we're also seeing that communication and LOT, I'm not quite remembering what LOT is right now. I think it's length of time that is spent for the onboarding process. So here we're seeing that the communication and the length of time are also highly correlated at a 0.844. The highest correlation we can see is a 1, which means that they're perfectly correlated. But when we say perfect correlation, some of the times it's not necessarily a good thing. This for me though is saying something good, because it is saying that as the length of time is saying that there is a lot of probably time spent communicating to this incumbent what he or she should note or know. So for example, you know, them asking about was the vision and mission and all of those communicated? How did the communication process take place as the onboarding took place, right? So there is a direct correlation between the length of time and what happens. If you have a snap onboarding process, more than likely it didn't go so well, right? So I'm pleased to see that length of time is coming out good with a correlation with the communication. Good. So this is how you actually look at the correlation. And so here, the student could actually argue that she has chosen a relational design to look at the correlation between the different subscales in the data sets. Questions?
Yes, sir. Sorry. We have the 0.00, right? Is that possible? A margin of error of 0?
Well, the thing statistically, well, quote unquote, no. But the thing is that, and even in representing the data based on APA, you would, for example, present it as 0.01 rather than straight 0, right? So usually there is a little bit of room there. So you wouldn't present it at exactly 0, right? Or interpretation wouldn't be 0. But what it is actually saying though is that you can rather than take it with a grain of salt, you can see that there is some merit to what is happening here, and you can then move further to interpret the data, right? Or make sense of the data. If it was insignificant, then as much as there is a relationship, you would then have to kind of say, well, you know, yeah, there's a relationship, but it's not significant. So therefore, you know, I wouldn't pay much attention to it. So what it's actually saying here, when you're seeing it like this, is that you say, pay attention to it, because there's something worth reading into. Right? Yeah. All right. I see we're kind of running out of time. There's one other thing I want you guys to take note of, and very useful. And so I needed to just go and do some research on it. what we call testing for reliability is very important, right? So I'm gonna quickly show you how to do the reliability for the prep items. So here we see prep item 1 was for prep, item 2 was for prep. We said item 4, I think. So what we're doing is that we're doing a reliability test. Item 7, I think. So 8, and I think 7 also, and item 18. Yes. So all of these are measuring one subscale. Now it is useful to take note that before you probably run any of the analysis, for example, you should actually test to see whether or not there's reliability in the subscales, because if a subscale is not reliable, you then do not want to include that as part of the data set, right? So you want to test the reliability, the different instruments for the reliability, right? Now, what could mess up your reliability, and we spend some time looking at the actual items and how they're worded, for example, because some, as we've seen, could actually throw the respondents out and we get all sorts of data that we don't want to get, right? So what I just did here was that I went on the statistics, I looked at item scale. Item, if scale is deleted, is very important, very important. In fact, next week, I'm gonna just do a quick powwow and start the class this way, because I don't want to gloss over this. It's very important, right? But I'm gonna send you to do some research before next class. So here we'll go continue and we press OK. So here, what we will see as a Cronbach alpha is what is considered a good alpha. We have a 0.33. That is a good alpha based on the literature. Anything above 0.7 is good. So you have a gradation. So 0.7, for example, is good. Anything in 0.8 could be, you know, very good. Anything 0.9 and above, excellent, right? So here we're seeing 0.33, which means very good. We're seeing 5 items, and it also shows the 5 items, right? If you notice this table though, that says Cronbach alpha if item is deleted. So here we saw 0.33. Down here, we're seeing so for this one, we're seeing 0.894. What this is actually saying is that if we remove this item, we could get a better Cronbach alpha. So what this is also suggesting, as we pointed out in the analysis that we did, this item, something was wrong with it. We made that conclusion very early on. And here, the analysis has actually showed us that something is wrong with this item, right? So we need to revisit this item, right? You recall, I think it was somebody from our group mentioning that something was wrong with this one. You recall that conversation? Yes, yes? All right, you see, I lost everybody.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right, we pointed it out, yes.
You said a while ago that anything above 0.75 is good.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have 0.894. Why would you want to delete it?
It could be better. But what this is actually suggesting, you know, is that the higher the reliability score, so let me back up. The higher the reliability score is the better the instrument. So what it is suggesting is that it is more consistent that people are going to respond to the items. That is what you want. So the better the reliability score is, the more jumping up you should be doing. The less the number is, you should feel a little bit more sad. Yeah? So you want the alpha score to be at its highest. And if you have it at its highest, then that's good. Right? So if you notice earlier, I said if you have 0.7 and some literature will say 0.75, for example, is good versus 0.8, which is very good, versus anything 0.9 and above is excellent. We always want, even on our test scores, we want excellent scores, eh? We just don't want good scores, but we want excellent marks. So it's the same thing that we're thinking about here, that we want an excellent Cronbach alpha for the instrument. And if we establish that, what it is saying is that, or suggesting that there is a greater level of consistency, or the participants who will read and also respond to the items, they will be consistent with the responses. So which means they're reading the items in the same way. Certain words are clicking to them in the same way, and they're responding consistently. That is what you want. Yeah? All right, I know what time our time is up. So next week when we come, I'm gonna open with this because time has run out on us. Just introduce this, and then we're going to segue into the qualitative aspect of the conversation, right? So I'm gonna send an email through Olivine and Trisha Gay with actually the videos that you can watch to help you to understand the Cronbach alpha and some of the other things. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so have a good night. And just to be encouraged, research is not an easy journey. It takes time. It takes going through. I still don't know some things. I've been doing this PhD for 8 years, and I've grown. And like I said to my last class, I have done it, so can you. So can you, right? I'm not brighter than any of you. And in fact, some of you probably your IQ is probably much stronger than mine, right? You can do it. You can do it. It's just time and just some attention to detail. Research requires attention to detail, and you strengthen that muscle as you go along, all right? So have a good night. And I'll catch up with you next week, all being well.
Okay, sir. Good night.
Great.
Good
I'm going to
night,
try and
sir.
see if I
Thanks for
can.
the
Yes, I'm going to try and see
encouragement.
if I can. Yes, I'm going to try and see if I can actually open a chat or discussion in Orville, so we can continue conversations there. There's that function. So I'm going to work with Olivine. I know when I did School of Education, there's that function, and whereas we collaborate with the participants throughout the week and stuff, I want to see that happening as well. All right?
Okay, sir.
All right, take care.
Good night, everybody.